not some distant, remote Pentagon-type folks. In all of my discussions with General Cray, indicate that, yes, he takes very seriously the concerns of the neighbors. Whether he'll be able to satisfy them, if you're living in that house in the path of the runway, obviously you're going to have a very strong point of view where he may or may not be able to satisfy you. But there are some things about their flight paths, about how they accelerate, that really make a difference in how much noise is caused, what hours they operate. These are all practical things where the Guard is indicating to all of us that they're going to try to work as much as they can with the neighbors.
Noise abatement procedures. That's what they call them.
Let's come a little close to home now, and immigration reform. Meaningful immigration reform is stalled in Congress. And it now appears that President Obama is about to take some decisive action on his own, but after the election. This includes issuing millions of work permits and green cards to current undocumented workers. What's the fix for our broken immigration system, Randall Meyer?
I'm going to defer on this question. As a scientist, I think of proximate and ultimate causes and proximate and ultimate events, I guess you'd say. The near term and the long term, and you look at the span of humanity and where we're going, the mercantile influence, trade, globalization, and national borders are getting less relevant. And I mean, it happens in the biological communities as well. I didn't mention that. I should have in the introduction that I'm a trained biologist, and we're always talking about invasive species, and it can be a real real trouble to shut down the border for anything, for any animal, and human beings are no exception. And you know, the only thing off the top of my mind I can say is that we, with the NAFTA agreement, we undercut the corn prices, and the Mexican farmers came over here, and they didn't always bring pleasant things when they came. There's going to be a lot more of that, folks. Sorry.
Thank you. Chris Erickson, immigration.
If we can't control our own border, we certainly cannot control the flow and movement of Al-Qaeda troops or ISIS troops or anyone else in any foreign country. We have to control our own borders first. I am so tired of the United States border being wide open like a prostitute. We treat the borders of the United States of America like a whore, letting anybody in, and it's got to stop.
Mr. Trudell.
It is a fact that people start blaming immigration and immigrants when the economy's on the skids. The real solution is a full employment economy. The real solution is prosperity for all. Let's not forget that this country was built by immigrants. I am Native American, so to me, all of you Europeans are immigrants, okay? Now, those people are coming here and in many cases working, and this is a fact, they're working at jobs that Americans don't want. They're working in agriculture. And if it weren't for immigrants, we would probably have problems with our food supply. These are facts. Look into this. So the real solution, again, is to not play the blame game and to not blame immigrants, but to have a full employment economy and prosperity for all. And it's all on my website, jerrytrudelforcongress.com. Thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. Donka, immigration.
Well, I think one of the first things we need to do is we do need to seal our borders down. We need to make them more security down there to stop the flow. Right now, you know, they're talking about issuing all these work permits for people. We're just barely coming out of a recession and getting people back to work. Now, if you add several million more people into the mix to give them jobs and give them work permits, aren't they going to be taking jobs away from the Americans who are looking for jobs? That's why we need to take care of our own first before we start taking care of other countries. So as far as I'm concerned, no, we do have to reform immigration. If people want to come to our country, you know, I'm only a second or third generation that's been in this country. My family came from Europe in the 1900s. So, you know, but let them get online like everybody else, because I think it's a slap in the face to the people who have come here legally. And many of the immigrants that I've talked to that have come from Mexico have said they don't want to see work permits for everybody and allow everybody in. They had to get in line, and they had to, you know, do it the legal way, and that's the way it should be done.
Thank you. Mr. Welsh.
Well, this is really an indication of the particular dysfunction in the House. the Senate passed a very good comprehensive immigration reform bill. Senator Leahy was a leader in the Judiciary Committee. It was supported bipartisan, with John McCain as a big advocate. And it did two things. One, it addressed the border concerns that people legitimately have. It really beefed up Border Patrol. But second, it started to recognize that there are situations here where we have to have it for our own future. I mean, our farmers here, they need immigration reform. Our tourist industry needs immigration reform. Some of our high-tech companies, you talk to IBM and the hassles they have getting a really qualified worker in here, they need immigration reform. And by the way, there's no amnesty. Some of these kids who were brought here, born here, when they were brought in by parents, they're here, quote, illegally, but they had no say over being here or not. And anybody who's going to be qualified to get a work permit is going to have to pay fines and get square with the government on their taxes. So we need this, and we should be voting on it, not voting 55 times to repeal health care.
Last on the 1-minute answer for immigration, Mr. Andrews.
Well, I'm glad we're finally having a chance to discuss this issue, but I'm disappointed that so many of the candidates here have seem to be supporting border control. I really liked Jerry's response the most of what I had heard. You know, we have an economy that's driven by private markets and free trade, and that's what's limiting jobs, not immigrants. And it's really a sleight of hand to be blaming the most powerless people in society for the economic problems when there's so much wealth in this society, there's so much work that needs to be done, and the free market system isn't providing it. Free trade agreements are what's driving immigration. The U.S. foreign policy that's supporting, you know, coup d'etats and strongman dictatorships in Central America, that's the legacy, is that people are coming to this country as a response to that. And we should also recognize that the Border Patrol and the border control is a military spending. This is part of a surveillance apparatus, and it's going to spread. It's an experiment that begins at the border and is going to be spread to all parts of society if we don't stop it.
Thank you. Mr. Donka, 8 million, 10 million, 12 million or more already living here illegally, undocumented. You talked about border controls, border lockdowns. What about them?
I mean, I'm a realist. We're not going to take 8 million people and deport them. I mean, that's why I said we have to start. We have to have a starting point. And the starting point is securing the border now. Then let's work with the people that are here and try to get something through where I don't want automatic amnesty. I don't think they should be put to the front of the line where they can automatically become citizens. I think we need to let them get in line with the rest of them. You know, I don't want to, you know, families that have been here, children that have been here, I don't want to see them deported. I have concerns for them too. But I also think we have to stop the flow. We can't continue having them flow into our country and, you know, just more and more of them that we have to take care of. You know, our systems and our services are overloaded now. How much more can we take?
Last call on immigration reform.
I just want to point out, I didn't support more controls, Matt. I just said it was inevitable.
What you said at the
you
end
could
was
put
the best
more
part.
controls if you want, or take them down and have less if you want. It's still going to happen.
Jerry Trudell.
A couple of comments. First of all, the reason why the agricultural sector wants immigration reform is because they rely on immigrants to take those low-paying jobs that most of us don't. So it is a myth that they're taking jobs away from us. The fact is there's plenty of work for everyone if we reinvest in America. What we need to do is to enact a transaction tax on Wall Street. 90% of the money in the markets is not tied directly to goods or services. What we need to do is rebuild America, and I believe there's plenty of work for everyone. That's what I believe.
Thank you all. Let's talk climate change. Climate scientists and people such as Vermont's own Bill McKibben say that the Earth can only withstand a 2 degrees Celsius rise in temperature by mid-century. We can withstand that before cataclysmic change. But to do that, we'd have to keep 80% of the known oil and gas reserves of the world locked underground. Do you agree with that assessment? If so, how do we keep that much in the ground while the world is pumping and drilling and mining all the time, the developed world? If you don't agree with climate change, tell me why not. Mr. Andrews.
Yes, well, that's, you know, I'm not a climate scientist, but I'm certainly listening to what climate scientists say. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has said that a 2% increase may be the tipping point. I don't think that it's clear that there's a single tipping point. But what's clear is that, that there is climate change, and we may be headed towards a 6-degree increase. That's Celsius. So it would be, as you said, cataclysmic. You know, ocean acidification, rising sea levels, desertification of rainforests and croplands. And, you know, I was in New York with 400,000 other Americans demanding action on this issue. And when I was down there, I went to the Climate Convergence the day before, and Naomi Klein spoke, and she said the real inconvenient truth, the really inconvenient truth is that it's not just about carbon, it's about capitalism. So I've called for nationalization of the fossil fuel industry because I see it as the only way we can actually transfer have a democratically planned, nationally coordinated program to get us off of fossil fuels.
Could come over here now with Mr. Welsh.
Well, I'm a strong believer that one of the gravest threats to the planet is climate change. And in fact, the Pentagon just released a study and said that climate change is a grave threat to national security because of the chaos that is occurring as a result of wild weather, rising seas. And we have to act sooner rather than later. Now, on the question of how do we do it on a practical level, we have to keep the lights on. We have to power industry. We have to power our homes. But we can do that if we double down on things like renewable energy. You know, our utility here, Green Mountain Power, is creating a solar city in Rutland. They're getting it. We can do it if we focus on energy efficiency. You know, we could reduce our carbon footprint by about 40% if we aggressively embraced energy efficiency. By the way, the more we take on the challenge of climate change by creating renewable energy systems, and energy efficiency, the more local jobs we're going to create. So in acknowledging our problem, facing it, we can actually create some wealth.
Let's move over to Mr. Dunk on climate change.
I believe the climate is changing. I'm just not totally convinced that it's totally man-made. I think that the weather does still go into cycles, and rises and falls in temperatures have been documented for many, many years. Some of the scientists like to take a small window and look at it and say, look, it's raised this much or hasn't raised this much. You know, it depends which camp you're in. There's some people that you can talk to. I can go on the internet and I can, you know, look at 10 different things, and, you know, there'll be 5 of them that'll say climate change is totally man-made, and another 5 will say, well, it's the cycles. Another will say, you know, I mean, if we look back into the 20s and 30s, the Arctic ice was just about gone in the 20s and 30s, and it's rebounded and come back. You know, that's a proven fact. That's what happened. So is man a contributor? Probably, we are. Do we have to find alternate sources of, you know, energy? Most definitely. I mean, that's just common sense. But let's not do a knee-jerk reaction to that. Let's do it with common sense and something that looks at the economy. If we do too much renewable, the price of electric is so high, it starts to hurt, basically, the people that we're trying to help.
Thank you. Jerry Judell.
I think that the best way to deal with our rapid climate changing problem is to jumpstart the energy revolution. I'd like to point out that it isn't also just rising temperatures. It's the rate of rising which is historically changed. And we know a lot more than the records that are taken. We've taken core samples. We know average temperatures are going back hundreds of thousands of years. So this rate of temperature increase of 1.6 degrees Fahrenheit in the past 100 years is a greater rate than has been occurring in this is a point of education for you. The other point of education is that it isn't just temperature. It's rainfall distribution. It's disruption of ecosystems where insects and other members of the ecosystem have their entire patterns disrupted. New England has, I believe, a 20% increase in precipitation over the past 100 years, while the Southwest is facing extended drought. So it's all about imbalances everywhere. It isn't just about temperature raising, but the best solution is to jumpstart the energy revolution, which would also jumpstart the economy and create prosperity for all. Thanks for the bell.
Right on time. Thank you. Chris Erickson.
Yes, I live in Chester, Vermont. That's in southeastern Vermont. And every fall I have green tomatoes, and I'm praying for global warming. but they stay green. And every spring and May, my apple tree out front blooms all these beautiful white apple blossoms. But near the end of May, May 29, May 30th, every year there's a freeze. It goes below freezing at night, and they all wilt and die. So every year I've been praying for global warming. Where's my global warming? Now, as to alternative energy, I just want you to know I'm 100% opposed to fracking. I'm 100% opposed to the natural gas pipeline underneath Lake Champlain.
Mr. Meyer.
I don't want to say that there's no energy crisis, but we have been discussing this for 30 years, 50 years, who knows what. I tend to think of it as a land use crisis, a crisis of water and food, and chiefly, above all, a population crisis. There are 7 billion people on this earth. Some of you who lived through the 60s may remember a book by Paul Ehrlich called The Population Bomb. There's now a Swedish statistician, I forget his name, who's come out with the theory of peak child. Ehrlich called him an idiot, and then he offered a more reasonable rebuttal after that. But I tend to agree that the peak child concept is not exactly a sound one. We need to remember our academic debates of yesteryear. Julian Simon and Paul Ehrlich. Ehrlich lost the bet, but if you had recalculated for any of the other decades in that century, he would have won 6 out of 10. Julian Simon called the human mind the ultimate resource, and I want to tell the Republicans, put your money where your mouth is. I'm a scientist. I'm here. I'm ready to solve your energy problems and your population problems or land use problems.
Let me stay with this a second. Mr. Welch, is there still a role for nuclear energy in the United States?
Hard to see it. I mean, it has enormous subsidies from taxpayers. It can't be built unless there's just an enormous taxpayer subsidy for that. So it's an immense diversion of resources. So I'm really skeptical about nuclear as a significant contributor to our new energy economy.
Anyone take exception with it? Is there a role for nuclear? Yes, Chris Erickson.
Yes, there's a book by a Dr. Helen Caldicott, The New Nuclear Dangers, the title of the book, and she explains that the federal government wants to get their hands on closed down civilian nuclear power plants, such as Vermont Yankee Nuclear Entergy in Vernon, Vermont will be closed down supposedly by the end of this year. So her book was written in 2002, warning us that the federal government wants to get a hold of these closed down nuclear energy, civilian nuclear energy plants to turn them into bomb part making factories, particularly tritium.
Nuclear, yes, Mr. Andrews.
Yeah, well, if nuclear energy were profitable, then private investors would be investing in it, and if it were safe, private insurers would be insuring them. And I don't see either of those things happening, and I frankly am glad for it. I think nuclear energy is not feasible. I just want to quickly plug that on October 27th, which is Monday, at 3 p.m., Rising Tide is going to be protesting the pipeline in front of the State House in Montpelier. So that's 3 p.m. on the 27th. And I just want to quickly go back, because Randall has mentioned this kind of Malthusian idea of population being a limiting factor. And really, I just don't think so. I think that if you look at the income inequality, if you look at the spending that the top 1%, the top 10%, the energy consumption of flying planes, of eating steak for dinner every night, we need to be moving to a plant-based diet. Those are the things that are taxing and pushing the limits of our planet, not the population.
What's your time window? In the 1930s, there were 2 billion, and the projection was to 3 billion by the end of the century. We've doubled or doubled twice.
Mm-hmm. Well, population growth is necessary for the economic growth of capitalism, which is why I'm for socialism.
Well, and what about land use? If you're going to talk about
most land use is actually cattle. It's not people.
In the dry areas, instead of dry farming, cattle. Is that what you prefer?
No, I think that we need to move away from cattle. I mean, most of the population is in cities. There's not a lot of.
There's a story in the New York Times today. The Kazakhs out in China, in northern China, had a couple drought years, and they're not getting the same price for their sheep.
Okay, hold. I enjoyed that, Mr. Trudell. When you said you want to jumpstart the energy economy, you're referring to just the
energy
renewable
revolution.
energy economy.
The energy revolution. I'm talking
energy-
about zero-emission energy technologies,
So
solar.
we are going to put all our eggs in one, there was no nuclear, no oil, coal.
I would say no nuclear. I would say wind down the coal, the coal and oil, fossil fuel industry. Wind it down, meaning by jump-starting and increasing our energy production with solar PV, solar thermal, etc., will automatically reduce our consumption and continue to reduce our consumption in such a way that we wean ourselves off. But what's actually happening is the opposite. First of all, just as a point of information, during the big bank meltdown of 2008, energy prices dropped dramatically because global consumption dropped 9.5%. That's all, 9.5%. This brought the price of a barrel of oil down to about $30 or $40, which was historically low for the time. The point